just like that. What's going on, guys? Josh from SoccerReviewsForYou.com, bringing you my review plus on-feet video of the brand new Nike Mercurial Vapor 12 Elite. This is the next generation of Mercurial Vapor, and a fairly controversial one because it's the first one since the Vapor 3 to not feature a Teijin synthetic upper. It's now full Flyknit and basically the same as the Superfly, but low cut as opposed to having a mid-cut collar. Is it good? Is it not so good? What's different from the previous Vapor 11? All of that's going to be discussed in today's video, and I must say they're a lot different in person than I was honestly expecting them to be. So if you want to learn everything there is to know, including how they fit and feel on feet, please stick around, watch the entire video. And if you're interested in a pair for yourself, you can check out the review page on my website. There'll be a little pop-up on screen, or you can click the first link down below in the description. That'll take you to the review page on my website, where you'll find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes, where you'll be able to pick these up below their normal $250 retail price as soon as they're available. Now, to start off, let's actually clarify the name of this shoe and really the next generation Mercurials, because if you follow Nike on social media, you know that they've been calling it the Vapor 360 and the Superfly 360, and you can see it does actually say Vapor 360 on the shoes themselves. However, on the box, here's a look at the box, the label specifically, you have the size, which of course it has the men's and women's equivalent right there. More on the sizing later in the video, but it's listed as a Vapor 12 Elite FG. FG referring to the firm ground stud pattern that this pair is. So technically it's a Vapor 360 or a Vapor 12 Elite. Both names are correct. Also, as usual with top-end Nike boots, it does come with a string bag with the matching orange and black colors and that Mercurial logo that some people absolutely hate. Starting off with the look, which is arguably the most controversial aspect of this next generation of Mercurial. Some people love it, some people absolutely hate it. I will say that I think they look better in person. However, I'm still not crazy about the positioning of this swoosh. I really think it should have been more positioned towards the lateral side of the shoe, so you don't have this big blank orange surface here on the lateral side. It kind of just makes it look like a solid orange sock, which is basically what these are to a certain extent, but I just think it would have looked a lot cleaner, kind of like what you have on the medial side of the shoe where there is a big swoosh in the middle. That looks pretty good. This looks a little bit strange to me. As far as the M logo on the back is concerned, you can see it's black in color, but it has this kind of color changing, almost oil slick effect to it, which is actually pretty cool. Then you can see the Mercurial branding right there as well, engineered for speed. That to me doesn't actually look too bad. You're gonna find the Flyknit and ACC branding right here on the medial side as well. The laces themselves are orange in color and have a little bit of like a color changing kind of sparkly extra additive in there, which is kind of interesting. The inside heel liner, as you can see, is neon yellow or Volt from Nike. And when you stretch out the top right here, it does reveal a little bit of Volt yellow as well. And then the sole plate, as you can see, is split sole. So most of that orange from the upper kind of carries over through the midfoot. More on that in just a second, but it does have this cool oil slick finish for the two plastic basically stud plates that you have in the forefoot and the heel. And it does come with a warning sticker, by the way, letting you know that this is a wearable finish. I'm not sure what color is underneath once it actually wears off, but just know that it is a wearable finish on these new Mercurials. Now, easily the most controversial aspect of this new Vapor is the fact that it's made out of Flyknit and not out of Teijin synthetic, something that every Vapor since the Vapor 3 has featured as a main upper material. And what's so great about Teijin synthetic is the fact that it's so thin. It really was the best synthetic on the market if you were looking for a true barefoot sensation. But I'm here to tell you that this is just as thin as what we got on the Vapor 11. The first thing that I thought of when I got to hold this shoe in my hands for the first time and even try them on is that they immediately reminded me of the Flyknit Ultras, which was obviously a limited edition release. We got 4 different colorways of it. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with it. There was a lot of hype around them, and people were extremely upset that it was only a limited edition release. But this is basically a continuation of what Nike was doing there, at least as far as the upper is concerned. This material, while it is Flyknit, they're calling this 360-degree Flyknit, which really, the only difference here is the fact that it's wrapping around the bottom because of this new split sole design. But I'm going to talk about this more in just a second. This isn't as unique as Nike is making it out to be. This was originally seen on the Vapor 3. Split soles are not new. Old Predators, the Predator Mania, had a split sole design. So this is not necessarily cutting edge technology. Again, Nike is one of the kings of marketing. Old stuff is now coming back as new stuff again. However, this upper, it's a Flyknit material, yes, but it's completely different than what we saw on the Superfly 4 as well as the Superfly 5, which would be the two other Flyknit Mercurials that we've had over the years. This is completely flat and extremely thin. I would say that this easily matches the thickness of the Vapor 11, if not being a little bit thinner, because it doesn't actually have that speed rib texturing running across the entire upper, which basically just added thickness to an otherwise very, very thin material. I would almost compare this to something like a Mercurial Vapor 10 in terms of overall thickness, which is not a bad thing at all. Also keep in mind that the entire inside of the shoe is lined in a synthetic material, which is partially why, along with the structure of the Flyknit material itself, this doesn't have any Flywire cable system like we have seen on previous Flyknit Mercurials. It really doesn't need it. The Flyknit Ultra didn't have it either. Is this quite as secure as what we saw from the Superfly 5 and the Superfly 4? It's really difficult to say because they have kind of tweaked the fit a little bit, and that really, the fit is what's going to determine how responsive the shoe is going to be. But in terms of overall lockdown and responsiveness, again, it feels very much like the upper on the Flyknit Ultra, and I found that to be an extremely responsive shoe. So I definitely think that this is going to carry on as being one of the, if not the most responsive shoes on the market right now. As far as texturing on the upper is concerned, it has a very thin layer of Nike skin on the surface, and you can see it's still Flyknit, so it's heavily engineered. Certain parts are thicker, certain parts are thinner, softer, more flexible, depending on what specific area of the foot it is. And you can see there is a little bit of an added texturing here, these streaks that more or less run the length of the shoe as opposed to directly across, kind of like what we saw from the last generation. But it's very, very thin, it's extremely minor, and honestly not something that you're really gonna feel on the ball whatsoever. You feel it to the touch against your fingers, but that is about it. And of course, the upper is also finished off with ACC all conditions control, acting as your wet control element that I really don't think it does much of anything. So to sum up the feel of the upper, it's still a barefoot sensation, it's still a super tight wrap around your foot, it still really has no padding to it whatsoever, and kind of like the way I described the Flyknit Ultra, it's kind of that in-between between the Superfly 5 and the Vapor 11 in terms of the feel, but definitely trending more towards the Vapor 11 rather than the Superfly 5. The upper also features a one-piece construction, of course, meaning that the central part, while it's more difficult to see because of the super thin Nike skin layer here, is elasticated. So right where the laces are positioned, the shoe does have that ability to stretch out. So it's kind of like a sock that completely wraps your foot, and then you have the dual lace hole system here running directly through the middle of the shoe. Once you tie that up, everything is super, super secure on your feet. And yes, the laces are necessary for those that will ask. Technically, you could wear them without laces and they would stay on your feet, but the stability, the heel lockdown, and the overall responsiveness would just not be very good at all. The laces are there for a reason, so if you buy these shoes, I would definitely recommend wearing them with the laces. I also really like the fact that they added this little extension bit here at the tip of what is basically a tongue. I just like that because it gives you something to grab onto when you're actually putting them on. Plus, I think it looks a little bit cool. It kind of reminds me of that little extra bit they added on the Vapor 3 tongue, and really we saw it on the Vapor 1 as well as the Vapor 2 as well. That's what it reminds me of. I just like the way it looks. Now, of course, this is a Vapor, which means that it's going to be low cut. Every Vapor has been low cut. This one is no different. However, this time around, the Vapor and the Superfly are pretty much exactly the same shoe. The difference is going to be the addition of a collar on the Superfly, but the heel construction remains the same. So it's not quite the same situation as what we have right now on the Phantom 3 Low and the Phantom 3 DF from the Hypervenom series, where those shoes are the same exact upper, but the construction in the heel, given that one is low and one is mid, is actually different. These are exactly the same, and the construction of the heel is technically identical to what we saw on the Flyknit Ultra. So again, that shoe was really a clue of a lot of the features that we're getting on this next generation of Mercurial. So you have an internal plastic heel counter, then you basically have a standard low cut, and then a little bit of an extension piece around the structured area of the heel in the form of this elasticated Flyknit. The difference on the Superfly is that this elasticated extension piece just extends higher up. So all you're getting with the Superfly over the Vapor is that extra bit of material. That's not really adding any kind of performance benefit. Some people do like the way that the collar feels if it's something that you're paying attention to all the time. Others really like the way that it looks as well. Some people really like the collars because it does help to keep any kind of debris from getting inside of the shoe. But that is basically all you're getting as a difference for your extra $25 over the Vapor with the new Superfly. So keep that in mind if you're trying to decide between the two. Aside from the collar, they're identical. Internally, the heel liner features a synthetic suede this year, which I don't think we've ever seen on a Mercurial model, which I don't mind at all. This grips your sock really nicely. You can see it has some very small perforations throughout, which I think is kind of a weight savings thing, but I'm not sure how much weight that's actually saving. It's got a decent amount of padding back there as well. Again, very reminiscent to what we saw on the Flyknit Ultra, although that had a synthetic leather, not a suede, so I actually like this a little bit more. And then as far as the insole is concerned, it's actually a pretty interesting feature here. So it's fully removable. You can see it looks at the top very similar to the previous Mercurial insole, and that's because it is more or less the same here. It's their Nike Grip mesh lining that honestly just feels like a regular mesh. There's nothing special about it at all. The foam base of the insole is about the same thickness as last year's, but it's a completely different foam, a much more rugged one this time around. And a lot of people had issues with that ortholite material on the Vapor 11 and Superfly 5 really wearing down and kind of getting chewed up in the forefoot toe box area. It really depended on the specific shape of your foot and just how you were placing pressure on the insole, but this should hold up a lot better. You also notice that there's an inserted black piece of foam here in the middle with an interesting pattern. That is not there for the sake of padding, that is actually for the sake of the insole not sliding around inside of the shoe. So a really interesting idea here. What Nike has done, as you can see underneath the insole on the base of the sole plate, which yes, it has a split sole, but there is still a sole plate. I'll explain in just a second. You're gonna find that exact same pattern on the base of the sole plate that you find on the base of the insole. So the idea is that when you slide the insole in, it locks into that particular pattern and prevents the insole from sliding around on the base of the anatomically shaped sole. Very cool idea. I'm not sure how effective it's actually going to be, given that this is all just foam. There's not a lot of structure to it anyways. So if you had a lot of force pushing on it all the time, and if it didn't really clip in properly, it could just kind of flatten out. There's really no way to tell or feel whether or not the insole is actually clipped in. And based on what I can see already, just from sliding the shoes on, it does actually move around a little bit. So I wouldn't necessarily buy into this as a super useful feature, but it definitely is a really, really cool idea. And if you're wondering whether or not you can change the insoles and put your own in, this texturing is not going to affect that whatsoever. If you want to replace these stock insoles, you absolutely can. As far as the sole plate and stud pattern is concerned, again, a controversial aspect of this shoe is the fact that it does have a split sole, something we haven't seen from the Mercurial line since the Vapor 5, so it's been quite some time. However, this isn't actually too far off from the construction that we saw on the Vapor 11 and the Superfly 5. It's still an anatomically shaped sole plate, and I can't really give you guys a great look at it just because it's dark inside the shoe, but there is a sole plate base, that is actually it there in yellow, that runs the full length of the shoe, including what you see in the middle. Maybe it's a little bit difficult to see the shape here, but there's a little bit of a stiffener bar that runs right here, and the shoe doesn't bend in the middle. When you bend the shoe, it bends in the exact same spot that it's supposed to bend, right in the forefoot area. The midfoot is really, really structured. Same thing goes for the heel. That's because there actually is a sole plate. The difference here, which what is a split sole basically is that the material, instead of tucking underneath the sole plate, it wraps over top of the sole plate, and you can see there's a small stitch running through the middle. If you're wondering about that kind of being a failure point in terms of durability, I really wouldn't be too worried about it whatsoever. So you have basically a sole plate, then you have an upper, but you still need studs. That's when they put a stud plate on top of that. So it's basically just sitting on top of the upper and the sole plate, and that's how a split sole works. It's still a real sole plate, there's just 3 pieces rather than 1 piece like we saw on the previous generation, which is an interesting way of doing things, considering that you would think less pieces equals lighter rather than more pieces, but this is what they decided to do. And honestly, I like the look of the split sole. I know not everybody's sold on it, but I think it looks quite cool. And as far as the actual sole plate in terms of its feel is concerned, it feels pretty similar to what we had on the Vapor 11 and the Superfly 5. Slightly thicker because technically you now have an extra layer of material in the form of the stud plate. It's not all incorporated into one, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Those that had struggles with stud pressure won't necessarily have those same issues on this particular model, just because there is a little bit more plastic before you get to the studs. And as far as the anatomical shaping is concerned, I would say it's a little bit less noticeable, or at least less significant than what we had on the Superfly and the Vapor of the previous generation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It still does its job, it still feels really good, and it's still something that is pretty exclusive to the Mercurial line. As far as the stud pattern is concerned, this is the firm ground variation, and I guess the best way to show you is to have them side by side. The firm ground stud pattern is exactly the same. It looks different because of the split sole, but as you guys can see, stud for stud, it's identical to the previous generation of Mercurials, which this was the first generation to introduce it. Usually Nike uses the same stud pattern on the Mercurials for at least 2 generations before they change anything up. this is no different, even though the Soleplate design looks to be so drastically changed. So in terms of traction, I think you can expect very good traction. They talked about this particular Soleplate design being designed off of or being inspired by a cheetah claw. So it's supposed to allow you to get more studs under your feet. We have, of course, seen certain pros. Neymar is somebody who played a game, slipped a lot, changed the shoes back to the old Vapor 11, and a lot of people made a big deal out of that slippage. I really don't think that the traction is going to be any better or worse whether you have the Vapor 12 on or the Vapor 11 on, given the stud pattern being pretty much exactly the same, and the Soleplates, to me at least, feeling pretty similar as well. So traction-wise, I still expect this to be the best of the best in terms of just having the most aggressive traction of any shoe on the market. You can see all the studs have this kind of chevron shape to them. They're all bladed and they're all angled in such a way where you have these ones at the front that are for kind of accelerating in a forward direction. You have these angled studs at the base of the forefoot for quick cuts and turns, and then you have plenty of aggression there at the heel as well. So the Mercurial line is really known for having super aggressive traction. This is going to be no different, both in terms of just having good traction as well as just feeling the same as the previous ones did. As far as weight is concerned, the Vapor 12 feels really, really light in hand as well as on feet, but on a scale, in a size 9.5 US, they weigh in, at least this particular pair, weighs in at 6.6 ounces, which is obviously very, very light. And if you're comparing it to the previous generation Vapor 11, it's more or less identical. You're talking about a weight difference of like 0.4 to 0.2 ounces, being slightly heavier rather than slightly lighter. I know Nike talked about shaving weight with this particular design, but honestly, it just doesn't make much sense to me to have more upper material and then of course have stud plates on top of that rather than just having less upper material and a one-piece sole plate. That just seems like it would be lighter. But despite all the changes that they've made, the weight for the most part is going to feel pretty much the same once you actually have the shoes on your feet, and it's still one of the lightest options out there. So if you're looking for that lightweight Mercurial sensation, this new Vapor is still going to provide that. Just don't expect it to be that drastically different from the previous generation. So as you can see, I swapped out the stock orange laces for some black reflective SR4U replacement laces, which match all the black accents on the upper and helps to break up what otherwise looks like a bright orange sock. I just think it looks really, really good with a little bit of an accent. So if you are interested in a pair of replacement laces for yourself, the website to go to is www.sr4ulaces.com. There'll be a little pop-up on screen as well as a link down below in the description. So if you're interested in a pair, be sure to go ahead and check that out. On feet, the Vapor 12s actually feel really, really good to me. If we're comparing it to previous generation Mercurials, whether it's the Superfly 5 or the Vapor 11, these feel way more like the Vapor 11s than they do the Superfly, which I think is a good thing. For those of you guys that are upset about the Vapor now being Flyknit rather than Teijin synthetic, honestly, this feels more like Teijin synthetic than any Flyknit upper that we've had in the past. It really does feel super thin, no extra padding to it, but arguably a little bit more flexible, especially once broken in comparison to the Teijin synthetic that we had on the Vapor 11. So I'm really, really happy with what they've done with this upper material. It feels quite good and kind of like a slight evolution of what we got from the Flyknit Ultra, a shoe that everybody was pretty much unanimously very, very happy with. As far as the overall structure of the upper is concerned, despite it not having any flywire cables, I know a lot of people were concerned about that. Because the material they've used is so thin this time around, so much thinner than the Superfly 5, I really don't think the flywire is necessary because it has the necessary structure required to feel locked in and secure on your feet. If you would have added flywire cables, because the material is so thin, it would have actually created pressure points, which was a common issue with the Superfly 1, 2, and 3, and part of the reason why some of those were some of the most uncomfortable shoes of all time. So I think the lack of flywire here, just like what we saw in the Flyknit Ultra, is actually a good thing in regards to comfort, rather than a bad thing in regards to performance, which is how a lot of people like to view it. As far as the heel is concerned, it's the same construction as the Flyknit Ultra and feels pretty much the same as well. Obviously, Nike talked a lot about the 360-degree Flyknit construction of the upper with the split sole design. It kind of wraps underneath the foot. That doesn't feel like anything special at all. It feels like a sole plate with an upper on top. Nothing about this split sole design feels unique on feet, if that's something that you were wondering. The sole plate, because it is slightly thicker, does feel slightly thicker as well. Not really a big thing though. You get used to it after about 2 minutes, I would say. And the shoe as a whole just wraps your foot really nicely. It doesn't have that second skin sensation, which is typical of a Mercurial. As far as the shape and fit is concerned, obviously that's something that Nike tweaks with every new generation of Mercurial model. And they talked about the shoes being more precisely tailored specific to the size, rather than basing everything off a size 9 US and just making it bigger or smaller like they've done in the past. So in that regard, the shoe fits really, really nicely. I would say in terms of the shape, what they've changed, if you're comparing it to the Vapor 11 or Superfly 5, which roughly had the same shape, these are slightly wider through the midfoot and definitely wider through the forefoot and toe box area, but it maintains the same general low profile and low volume of the shoe. So if anything, I would say that these fit more comfortably rather than necessarily better than the previous generation Mercurials. The last gen Mercurials fit really, really well. They were just that little bit tighter. So if you like having something slightly wider, perhaps a little bit more comfortable on your feet, that's kind of what this new Mercurial is going to have on offer, which I do not think is a bad thing at all. The previous Mercurials fit so tight that I think for most people, they were just squeezing your feet. These still have that kind of squeezing your feet really tight sensation, but because they're just a touch wider, they feel that much more comfortable, at least for me personally. Everyone's gonna have their own experience, whether or not going a little bit wider or going a little bit narrow is gonna be better for their feet specifically. But honestly, I don't have any issues with what they've done here. And as far as the overall width is concerned, it's still a Mercurial, it still has that super tight fit, and really you're not gonna get much stretch out of this upper at all. So if you have super wide feet, you're probably not gonna be all that comfortable in this particular shoe, but if you've worn Mercurials in the past, you're not gonna have any issues fitting into these at all. As far as sizing is concerned, that pretty much remains the same as previous Mercurial generations. Historically, I've worn a size 9 US, but fairly recently, my feet seem to have expanded slightly. I'm more like a 9 1/4 rather than a true 9 US. So I'm wearing a size 9.5 here, and the fit is pretty well perfect. It's just a slightly longer than I would like it to be. But for the most part, I would say sizing is identical to what we had from the previous generation of Mercurials. So if you are looking to order a pair of these for yourself, I would recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So to sum up the Vapor 12 Elite, I don't necessarily think that this is a giant leap forward for the Mercurial line, but I don't think we can expect giant leap forwards from this line just because we've seen so much innovation over the years already. This is more or less kind of a variation of stuff that we've seen before, but altogether it works really, really nicely. I think if you really wanted to get your hands on the Flyknit Ultra and you weren't able to, this is more or less a continuation of what they started with that limited edition release, with the Flyknit upper, the way that it fits to a certain extent, and just the overall feel of the shoe. I like this upper more than what we had from the Vapor 11 as well as the Superfly 5. So in that regard, it is an improvement. They've tweaked the fit a little bit that I actually think is a little bit nicer as well. Is the Soleplate any better or worse given its new split sole design? Honestly, I don't think it really makes that much of a difference, period. It's got a little bit more thickness to it, which is more of a preference thing rather than being better or worse. And of course, the weight stays the same as well. Same thing goes for the traction. So as a whole, I think it's equally as good as what we had from previous generations. But if you're asking my preference, I do actually like this more than the Vapor 11, which I guess is the ultimate goal when you release a brand new model. Anyways, guys, that is it for my review. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to support it with a like. If you have any questions, which I'm sure you will, leave those down below in the comments. I'll do my best to get an answer out to you as soon as I possibly can. Again, if you're interested in a pair for yourself, it's the first link down below. That'll take you to the review page on my website, where you will find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes, where you'll be able to pick these up below their normal $250 retail price. If you aren't subscribed already, be sure to hit that subscribe button for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. For those wondering about comparisons and playtests, those are coming very, very soon, so stay tuned to the channel for that. Subscribe if you aren't already so you don't miss. All my social media information linked down below as well. Other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. As always, thanks for watching.